G'day, dear viewers, and thank you for your company once again here on truth2u.org. That's truth, number 2, letter U.org. I'm Jono Vandor, and joining me from the HOREB Institute in Louisiana is the author of the Moses Scroll, Ross Nichols. G'day, Ross.
Hello, Jono. How are you, my friend?
Doing very well, thank you, my friend. It is, of course, time for Season 3 of Torah Pearls.
Yay!
And brought to you by Tanakh Tours. That's Tanakh, TanakhTours.com. Taking you to where it happened and bringing your Tanakh to life. Our next adventure is booked for November 2025, Ross, and people can secure their seats on the bus at
That's right. And by the way, Jono, you told me that we still have people that signed up and said, we don't care how long it takes, we're still in. So we've got a certain number of those seats already taken.
That's right. So tickets are limited, so don't delay. Now we have our special guest from ChatGPT, our AI critical scholar, Ezra. Are you there, Ezra? Can you give us a quick update, not an update, a summary rather, on the Torah portion of Noach?
All right, so in Parsha Noach, we dive right into the famous story of Noah, the ark, and that massive flood. God sees the corruption and violence on earth and decides to reset humanity, sparing only Noah, a man described as righteous in his generation, and his family. They're instructed to build this giant ark and gather a pair, or sometimes 7 pairs, of every living creature to survive the flood. After the rains subside, the ark lands on Mount Ararat. Noah releases birds to test the waters, and eventually they all disembark. God then establishes a covenant with Noah, marked by the sign of the rainbow, promising never to flood the earth again. There's also a fascinating moment when Noah, after planting a vineyard and drinking the wine, ends up in a rather vulnerable situation, leading to a dramatic encounter with his sons. The portion closes with the story of the Tower of Babel, where humanity's ambition to reach the heavens results in divine intervention. God confuses their languages, scattering them across the earth, so we go from a global reset to a divine disruption of unity, setting the stage for humanity's spread across the world.
All right, that's not bad. Thank you very
Jono,
much. Ezra, go ahead.
I was just going to say, not only do people get a bit of Parsha, they get, critical historical scholarship, they get the two of us going back and forth on these things, and they get good advice like, hey, don't drink too much wine because did you notice it said that Noah was put in a vulnerable position.
We may talk about that. We'll see. We'll see whether we get there or not.
But anyway, yeah.
Hey, so listen, just before we continue, Ezra just said something, and I thought I'll just check with you because I've never heard that before. He made reference to 7 pairs, either a pair of every animal or 7 pairs. Is it 7 or is it 7 pairs? How do you recall it?
Well, I tell you, the way I want to say I recall, except that I know a little bit more, and we've been talking about this in some of our other studies, but, as a child growing up, I remember 2 by 2. I think there was even a song, Noah brought the animals in the ark 2 by 2, and that's kind of the way I think most people think about it. But what Ezra brings up is something interesting because we actually have, it depends. It depends on which source we read. One of the sources tells us it's 2 by 2. Another talks about 7 pairs. So, so it is 7 pairs rather than 7. Because this is what I'm like. I want to have a look at this. We're going to be looking. Obviously, we're in the Torah portion, Noach, and we're doing Torah Pearls in light of critical scholarship and the proto-biblical document known as the Moses Scroll. We're going to be bringing that in. As well, when appropriate. They're not just the Moses Scroll, but other ancient sources as well. Right.
And in this Torah portion, we're going to be maybe touching on topics such as the Nephilim, how many animals were brought into the ark, the origin of clean and unclean, ritual sacrifice, and source. Which sources contributed to this Torah portion. Right off the bat, Ross, we do find a connection between the Moses Scroll. But first, I think we finished last week's Torah portion telling everybody to, giving them a little bit of homework, and that, of course, was I think, an hour and a half program that we did in recent months on the Nephilim.
Right.
Quite comprehensive. No reason to go over all of that again. If you haven't watched that, maybe Seth can put a link under this program where you can go and watch that. But we did do that one in some detail.
You know,
Fairly comprehensive.
somebody did watch it. I'm sorry. Let me just, I know we're going to get into some question and comments, but I just wanted to say that one of the comments really struck me. Julia Stepanova left a comment, and are you ready for this, Jono?
Yeah, that's a cool name, by the way. Julia Stepanova.
I like it a lot. She goes by @JuliaJulia on YouTube, and she says, just a waste of time. These two have no idea what they're talking about.
No idea.
No idea. None. So anyway, you gave homework in good faith that they would go listen to it, and turns out the program didn't do anything for Julia.
Now, Julia, did she leave that on the Nephilim program, or did she leave that on the Noah?
Did, yeah.
Oh, on the Nephilim.
Yeah.
Oh, I missed that, Julia. I'm glad you picked that up. Well, I'd be interested more specific. I mean, it's fine, dear viewers, if you disagree with us, but let us know why. Give us something to go on.
Yeah, that's right. Give us a little bit more, because maybe Julia has some insight that she would like to share in the comments. We welcome comments like that, right? Give us a little bit more.
Over that step in the process of letting us know what it was that she disagreed with.
That's exactly right.
The connection between this passage and the Moses scroll, Ross. I actually do mention it. I do mention it in that video, but I'm going to mention it again here.
Okay.
And the reason why I'm just going to keep it fresh in people's minds is because we're going to talk about it in Lech Lecha, in our next Torah portion as well. It comes up. And that is this, that in the Pentateuch, the Nephilim in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, they're identified with the Anakim, right? The Anakites in Numbers 13, verse 33. Yep. They are in turn identified with the Rephaim, who are equated with the Emim in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 10 to 11.
Right.
They're equated with the Azamzumim, right? Just to explain this to everybody just quickly, the Emim is the name, I think, that the Moabites give to the Rephaim. The Zamzumim, or as it appears in the Moses scroll, the Azamzumim, is the name the Ammonites give to the Rephaim. But these are all Rephaim, apparently. In Deuteronomy 2, verse 20-21. King Og of Bashan in Deuteronomy 3, verse 11 says that he's a remnant of the Rephaim. All of these guys are Rephaim.
Right.
And the challenge for the fundamentalists, and maybe this is what Julia doesn't like, is that, because perhaps she's a fundamentalist, I don't know.
Maybe.
But the challenge is that in our Torah portion, Genesis 6:7 claims that Jehovah flooded the earth in order that he might wipe from the face of the earth the human race that I have created, he's made to say. And in Genesis chapter 7, verse 22 and 23, it says, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the spirit of life, and all that was on dry land died. Yep. Every living thing that it was destroyed upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle and creeping things and the birds of the heavens, and they were destroyed from the earth, Ross, and Noah only was left, and they that were with him in the ark. So the interesting thing about this is that the Moses scroll contains no references. While it does speak of the Emim and the Rephaim and the Azamzumim, and it speaks of Og, it contains no references to the Nephilim, to giants, to Anakites, the Anakim, that sort of stuff.
Hey,
which I find interesting. Go ahead.
Let me just to give people something to check out. Along those same lines, you mentioned Og of Bashan, and we talk about these giants and the big old bed. If you want to go see a big bed, take the kids. Bring them. They sell souvenirs there. It's almost like it's describing an amusement park, a roadside thing. But anyway,
a museum piece. I think Brett refers to it as a museum piece.
That's really what it says. So here's something interesting in Deuteronomy. This is just a sidebar, but you brought up Og. I want to touch it in Deuteronomy chapter 2, and there is a similar passage in the Moses scroll, but it lacks certain piece of this, and this is what really strikes me when I read this. It says, "When we had headed out along the route of the wilderness of Moab, the Lord said to me, 'Don't harass Moab or engage them in battle, for I will not give you any of its land as possession, since I have given Ar as a possession to the descendants of Lot, The Emim, you just mentioned, a large and numerous people as tall as the Anakim had formerly inhabited. Like the Anakim, they are usually reckoned as Rephaim, though the Moabites call them Emim. Moreover, the HOREB had formerly inhabited Seir, but the descendants of Esau dispossessed them, destroying them, settling in their place, get this, as Israel had done in the land that the Lord gave them as a possession. And then it says, now then, proceed to cross over the Wadi Zered. Clearly, this is an anachronism because whoever is writing this, the children of Israel have already taken possession of the land. And I think, how many years did we read over this and we just never caught that? But so the Moses scroll doesn't contain this type of anachronism.
It doesn't have that. So it doesn't have the anachronisms. It doesn't have reference to giants. So just mentioning that because it's relevant to our reference in this week's Torah portion. But I want to keep it fresh in your mind, dear viewers, because oddly enough, I was quite surprised to see that it becomes very relevant again in Lech Lecha. We'll go more on about that in next week's Torah portion.
Yep.
Moving on from there, Ross, there are a number of conflicting stories. We've already touched on one, and that is the number of animals that go into the ark. But that's not the only one.
Well, let's before we go to another one, John, you want to hit those? You want me to read those two passages?
Let's start with that. Yeah. So the first passage is Genesis chapter 6, verses 19 and 20.
Okay.
Maybe we can get Ezra. Ezra, can you read that? Genesis chapter 6, 19 to 20.
And of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee. They shall be male and female. Of the birds after their kind, and of the cattle after their kind, of every creeping thing of the ground after its kind, 2 of every sort shall come unto thee, to keep them alive.
Now, that's the way I remember it, Jono, when I was a kid.
That's your 2 by 2. That's your song.
That's the song, 2 by 2, 2 by 2.
Now, Ezra, if I may, can you read Genesis chapter 7, verse 2?
Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee 7 and 7, the male and his female. And of the beasts that are not clean, 2, the male and his female.
Well, there you go, Ross. Now, so that answers it. For whatever reason, up until this point, I'll just confess something. I thought that one passage said, bring them 2 by 2, male and female. And another passage said, just go and grab 7 of them. Grab 7. Grab a few extra because you're going to sacrifice some of those guys. But actually, 7 pairs. So there's 14 rather than 2. Interesting. So there it is. And that's verse. Now, Ross, just fill us in. According to the critical scholars, who are the sources of these 2 passages that we just read?
It might even be a surprise. It might be a surprise. We have two accounts that give, and you just had Ezra read the 2 accounts. All right, one of those accounts is J, the other is P. Now, this is sort of a question for the viewers. If we think of P, we often think of the priestly, and that leads us to think of what?
Sacrifice.
That's right. So one might think that the one that mentions 7 pairs is which one, J or P? Most people
that'd be P. Surely you'd put your money on that one because they're the ones that want to sacrifice all over the shop. Surely,
and
is that right?
And that's what I thought. But after studying the sources, according to critical scholarship, it's just the opposite. Actually, what we have here is the J source, according to most critical scholars, has 7 pairs, whereas P has 2 pairs. And so why is that? I mean, this is what would make us, really be a little bit puzzled as far as how do we know then? I thought the priestly would talk about the ones for and clean and unclean. By the way, this is the first reference to clean and unclean. We'll talk about that. So one quick statement. This is like the rule. Certainly, P does have a lot of sacrifices, but there are no sacrifices in P until Exodus 40. And why would that be? Because according to the priestly text, you got to have the tabernacle. That's right.
The tabernacle.
That's right.
So the priestly text is far more regimented. Now, I was surprised at this as well, I have to say. And I read an article by Dr. Lisbeth S. Fried, and she writes in an article entitled "Who Wrote the Story of Noah and When?" which is really
Right.
the question that we're asking. She said, for the priestly rite, sacrifices are a system of ritual requirements commanded by Jehovah. She's got the tetragrammaton there. First at Mount Sinai and controlled by priests of the Aaronide lineage. They may be offered only, Ross, at the tabernacle and later at the Jerusalem temple. Building an altar just anywhere, she goes on to say, and sacrificing on it is not permissible at all. While P includes the option of private sacrifices for individuals at the tabernacle or temple, whether as gifts or thanks or atonement for sin, these sacrifices are not willy-nilly. I love that she
Willy-nilly.
includes that. They're
Yep.
not willy-nilly, Ross, a function of random mood by the worshipper. Moreover, Jehovah need not rely on these random contributions, as he is to receive automatic twice daily burnt offerings, one lamb in the morning and another at twilight, accompanied by an ephah of grain mixed with 1/4 of a hin of beaten oil and another quarter hin of wine or alcoholic beverage. Sounds good. In other words, the priests feed Jehovah a full meal twice a day. Now, this is according to the priestly source. His daily breakfast and supper prepared just the way he likes it, and this does not include the additional offerings on Shabbat, new moon, and festivals. For P, the sacrificial system is primarily a function of priests serving the deity in his dwelling place, the tabernacle or the temple. P never mentions sacrifices in Genesis. In P, before the construction of the tabernacle in Exodus, as you pointed out, no sacrifices are offered at all. And I thought, by golly, didn't know that. That is surprising.
Yeah, and there are several things like that we're going to pick up along the way. And last week, when we talked during Bereshit, we were going through that. We brought up the idea about the name. A lot of people have a certain idea about, if E and J, they think that E never uses the name, whereas J uses a tetragrammaton. But we learned that's not the case. E does use the name, but only after Exodus chapter 6. Here we have another rule. Yes, you have sacrifices in P, and there are a lot of sacrifices in P, but not before Exodus chapter 40 and the tabernacle construction.
Right. It's according to the rules. It seems like the priests are very much according to the rules. Very, very formal, whereas J just seems to be a little bit more dynamic in their narrative. All right, so speaking of sacrifice, Ross, I want to get Ezra to read Genesis chapter 8, verses 20 to 22.
And Noah builded an altar unto Jehovah, and took of every clean beast, and of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And Jehovah smelled the sweet savor. And Jehovah said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for that the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more everything living, as I have done. While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease.
Nice. So the Lord, verse 21, the Lord smelled the pleasing odor, and the Lord, he was appeased by this. Don't we all love that? When you smell a barbecue and you think, oh, yeah.
Hey, you know what's interesting? Right. You know what's interesting about that? And I noticed it as Ezra read this. As you look in, like, the Genesis Torah tablet marks the sources. So right before you had Ezra read verses 20 through 22 of chapter 8, that section, interestingly enough, is J, whereas right before it is P, right after it is P. And what we find is often, if you read these sections, like you pull out the J and you read the section that's before it and the section after it, it flows perfectly. And we see this all the time. In fact, the section, verse 19 of chapter 8, says, every beast, every creeping thing, and every bird whatsoever moveth upon the earth after their families went forth out of the ark. The next verse, if you go to the next verse in P, says, and Elohim, God, blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply. So it's like this section of J, you can pull it out and it flows naturally. In fact, one of the things that Richard Elliott Friedman points out in some of his work is that, especially in this story, the narratives, plural, of Noah, his life and times and so forth, they are so woven together masterfully by an editor, a redactor, that once you separate the strands, you can read, for instance, you can read P and just read all of P. You can read J and read all of J. It's very,
and they
very interesting.
flow.
It's a compelling case.
Yeah, and
very
they flow.
compelling.
When you tease them apart and then read them by themselves, both narratives flow. While we're on this, Ross, something occurred to me, and it takes us back to a question that arises in Bereshit, in our first Torah portion. And I want you to take your Torah tablet. Now, before we go any further, just remind everyone about the Torah tablet. Go ahead.
Yeah, Torah tablet is a very valuable tool. I actually got the idea because I ordered, there is an ESV that's put out by Crossway, and you can buy it in single volumes, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. It's a Torah workbook, basically. In other words, it had the ESV on one side and a tablet place for writing on the other. I ordered this, but the quick reason behind what we developed here was I said, I would prefer to have the ASV 1901. It's more of a what do we say? Maybe
it's a formal translation.
It's formal. It's more
very
literal.
True to the text. It's more literal, and it uses the name Jehovah, which is always clarifying.
That's right.
I like it. It's one of my go-tos.
And so basically, I said, if I had one of these little tablets that had the triennial, the annual cycle of readings, the white spaces, when does the text break according to the Leningrad Codex? Well, they didn't have one of those, so we designed one, and we've got it up on HOREBinstitute.com. They can get Genesis now, and we are going to have Exodus available before you and I get to the book of Exodus and Torah Pearls. So, very valuable tool.
Handy
very
tool.
Valuable. Yep.
Handy tool, especially for what we're doing. What I want you to do is open to Genesis chapter 4, verses 3 and 4, and tell me what the source is.
Genesis 4. And you said verses 3 and 4. Okay. Genesis 4, 3 and 4, Jono, is J.
Right. Okay, so now that makes sense to me, Ross, because Genesis 8, 20 to 22 is J. This one is J. And what we have is the story of Cain and Abel, and we find that for some reason that isn't explicit in the text of Genesis chapter 4, God is not thrilled with Cain's offering, but Abel's offering is a good thing. And why is that? We don't really know. But we're given the answer here in Genesis chapter 8, verses 20 to 22. The answer, of course, is he likes the smell of the barbecue. The deity of the Yahwist, can I say that?
Yep.
He's appeased. He is appeased by the sweet smelling, the pleasing odor of the barbie.
And you know what's interesting, Jono, to this point, what I find really interesting about this, because I've thought about it, everyone says, well, obviously, Cain had some sort of begrudging attitude. He didn't approach the offering in the correct way. But really, if you think about it, Cain is doing what mankind was put on the earth to do. He's a farmer. No one that we know of has ever offered a sacrifice. In fact, we get the idea that sacrifice is what God wants if you read texts like this from Jay, but is it really? It depends. It depends on which source you read.
So there you go. Interesting thing. Another one, sacrifice versus rainbow. So in one text you have the pleasing odor appeasing God, the pleasing odor of the sacrifice appeasing God, saying, not going to do that again. A little bit later you have the rainbow, where God places the rainbow in the sky and says, when I see this, I will remember my covenant and I won't do this again. Seems to be, and I think, again, you have in one text, you have Lord or Jehovah. The other text is Elohim. Seems to be priestly versus Yahwist as well.
Well, and the good thing is, like I said, in this it's basically a textbook. But as I look at it, I can quickly see a lot of times you're bringing up a text and you go, oh, well, that's J. You said it a moment ago. You said, oh, yeah, of course that's J because it matches what I see here. We start to recognize certain proclivities, certain tendencies of these writers, and it really begins to stand out. Jono, a minute ago, we talked about some of the differences, particularly the number of animals. That's not the only one, though. Can I get into one more difference?
Has it got to do with how long the flood lasted?
Yeah. You want to do that?
Go ahead.
All right.
I do want to do that.
Because here's the deal. Just like I said, ever since I was a kid, I remember 2 by 2. I mean, that's the thing that people know. So how many days did the water prevail? Well, according to the story that I remember, it's 40 days and 40 nights. Well, so it depends, because we've got a couple of passages in Genesis chapter 7, verse 12, and 7, verse 17, and I'm just going to pull those up. 7,
and also
12.
7 verse 4. Also 7 verse 4. So 7 verse 4 says, "For in 7 days' time I will make it rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and I will blot out from the earth all existence of creation."
That's right.
In verse 12, what do you got?
Yep, verse 12 says, "And the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights." And then verse 17, "And the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bare up the ark, and it was lifted up above the earth." So you get this idea that it's a 40-day, 40-night ordeal, and that is put forward in three
times.
Very, very clear texts.
3 times in the text.
All
and interestingly, Ross,
yep.
That's right. And the combination, by the way, of 40 days and 40 nights is a phrase that occurs twice in the Moses scroll as well. But then we have chapter 7, verse 24. What does it say?
Let's see. 7, verse 24 says, "And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days." Now, look, a lot of times, I guess these stories have become so intertwined, these sources, that people read right over that because they go, well, 40 days, 40 nights, the rain lasted, but then the waters prevailed over the earth 150 days. However, we have 2 different sources here. J is consistent in that it says in the 3 passages we just read, J is consistent. 40 days, 40 nights. P, now this is interesting because J continues, verse 22 through 23 is J, and then verse 24 is P. "And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days.
And we have a white space there, don't we, between those? And that's interesting. And not just there, but also in, verse 3? "The waters then receded steadily from the earth. At the end of 150 days, the waters diminished," so that, and so on and so forth. Yeah,
and interestingly enough, this particular verse, now a lot of people who haven't really looked at the sources and the way that they come together, the way that the scholars have kind of parsed these out, and they find, I've heard people say, in fact, I used to hold this view. I said, look, I mean, they're kind of cutting verses in half, and what they're really trying to do is examine this text and identify the pen and so forth. Well, in this particular verse you just mentioned, in chapter 8, verse 3, it's the second part of that verse. The first part of the verse is J. But where it says, "And after the end of 150 days, the water decreased," that's P. And we know it's P because look at verse 24. It also is P. These are the kinds of decisions that are made by the critical scholars on these points.
That is interesting. So on that, Ross, it's not just that there's a handful of very obvious contradictions, but there's also what is called doublets, and that is that because we have 2 sources primarily, there's a lot of information that overlaps, and the compiler, the scribe, the editor, if you like, that brought them together didn't want to omit any very important information, so just clearly included them, so things are said twice. There's a great article in the Torah.com, which perhaps we'll put a link underneath for this one as well.
Yeah, it's a nice publication. We love that website.
It's really good website, and this is a good one, a textual study of Noah's flood. by the staff editors. And within that, I mean, it does talk about some of these contradictions, but it has a long list of doublets. And I'm just going to read
Sure.
that list to you just to give you an idea. In addition, for people who want to do their homework and get a little bit more, it does tease apart these two sources and offers them separately for you to read. And I would suggest that you do that, and you'll see just how much sense it makes. Here are some of the doublets, things that are mentioned twice. God notes that humans are wicked, twice. God tells Noah of his decision to wipe out all life from the earth. God tells Noah to gather a pair of each animal species and put them on the ark. God records, the story records that Noah fulfills God's commandment twice. Noah and his family get on the ark twice. The flood starts twice. The animals get on the ark twice. The flood waters lift the ark twice. All the humans and animals on earth die twice. That's no fun.
Yeah.
And Noah sends out a raven to look for. Now, this is an interesting thing. I'm wondering about this. And while you've got your Torah tablet open, we have the raven in 8 verse 7 versus the dove in 8 to 12. Are those two attributed to different sources?
Let me look. 8 and
have a look and
7, chapter 7, chapter 8. Okay, 8, 7 is P, or is considered P. And then what's the other verse that you said?
8 verses 8 to 12 regarding the dove.
That is J. That's J.
Interestingly.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, to the author of this article, to their point, when you separate those two out and you read these, people will be amazed. It really is. It becomes very obvious that we've got two different sources that have been pulled together. So I'm with you. When you sent that article to me, I was pretty blown away. I had seen that very exercise in Richard Elliott Friedman's work, but it's powerful.
It's good. It's good. And lastly, Noah's 3 sons are introduced twice. So again, not wanting to leave anything out, they just included this information, and so we're told things numerous times. There's also terminological doublets, which I won't go into, but you can read about that there. Yeah. All right, so what else we got here, Ross?
Well, anytime I think about Noah, we think about this flood. There are other ancient stories. Some, have studied these as well. Yeah, so I don't know. Do we want to ask Ezra to give us just a brief summary of couple of different, maybe a couple of these other ancient Near Eastern stories of a flood related to our Parsha Noah?
There are quite a few flood narratives from cultures around the world that echo themes from Parashat Noach. The most famous parallel is from the Mesopotamian Epic of Gilgamesh, which includes the tale of Utnapishtim, a man warned by the god Ea about an impending flood meant to wipe out humanity. Utnapishtim builds a boat, gathers animals, and survives the flood, much like Noah, and even sends out birds to find dry land. In Hindu mythology, there's the story of Manu, who's warned by the god Vishnu, in the form of a fish, about a massive flood. Manu builds an ark, fills it with seeds of life, and is guided by Vishnu's fish form through the waters until he reaches safety. In Greek mythology, Deucalion and Pyrrha survive a great flood sent by Zeus to cleanse the earth of human corruption. After the waters recede, they repopulate the world by throwing stones over their shoulders, which transform into people. These stories, like Noah's, are often about divine intervention, survival, and rebirth, emphasizing moral lessons about the preservation of life and the divine desire to reshape humanity's destiny after corruption.
Yeah, that's interesting. And something that scholars often highlight is that the whole flood story is kind of a decreation. I mean, you have creation leading up until this point, and then there's a lament or a regret by God that he created man. I'm just going to undo this, but keeps a remnant and doesn't quite undo it entirely. Thinks I'm just going to try again with you guys and let's see how it goes. Very interesting. But obviously various flood stories throughout ancient history that again have some overlap with this story as well.
One other thing that I really think about anytime this Torah portion rolls around is the Genesis Apocryphon. It's a Dead Sea Scroll. And this particular story in the Genesis Apocryphon is one of the most interesting stories and shows the creative storytelling from antiquity. And I think we actually got into this a little bit in our series or our previous show on the Nephilim. I think we touched on this. Do you recall?
I think we did.
Just the high point that I always think is interesting is that in the story, Noah's father is concerned that Noah's mother, she's pregnant with Noah, by the way, in this story, and he's concerned, Jono, that the baby is not his. And so he's really pressing her about this, And so I'll just read the first opening of this scroll.
Now you're reading from the scroll. This is known as the Genesis Apocryphon.
That's right.
This is that one. Yeah.
And this is I'm reading from the complete Dead Sea Scrolls in English, and this is Gaza Vermish. This is the text, really. So anyway, it says, if you have the book, it's on page 481. Behold, I thought then within my heart that conception was due to the watchers and the holy ones. This is Noah's father is speaking. And to the giants, Jono. And my heart was troubled within me because of this child. Then I, Lamech, approached Bat Enosh, my wife, in haste, and said to her, by the Most High, the great Lord, the King of all the worlds, and ruler of the sons of heaven, until you tell me all things truthfully, tell me truthfully and not falsely, by the King of the worlds, until you tell me truthfully and not falsely. And he goes on. And Bat Enosh, his wife, tries very hard to convince him, no, this is your baby. And one of the things that's interesting is even in her name, Jono, her name Bat Enosh it means the daughter of a mortal. So it's saying, the author is telling us that at this time, look, there's this mixture going on. So, are they pure human or are they mixed with these fallen ones, these watchers, however you describe it?
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? I mentioned in the last Torah portion how the way that Genesis begins is without explanation of monotheism, that there is only God. And I just highlighted, I think it was, what was it, Rabbi, I forget his name now off the top of my head, Rabbi Solomon, who pointed out that which is obviously missing from this narrative is the pantheon of gods, with the exception of let us make man in our image. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. And it assumes a monotheistic worldview, which is the reason why I speculated that I think that the 10 words certainly came before this explanation as to how God created in 6 days. It's assuming knowledge of monotheism, and it doesn't have to revisit that. But as we continue through Bereshit, and in fact through the Pentateuch as a whole, you can see there's just places where they just sort of want to push that envelope. Some of the sources just want to push that and go, there's stuff going on. There's these heroes of old and men of renown, and
right.
Angels that the sons of Elohim, B'nai Elohim, that come and mate with the daughters of men. And, there's stuff going on. We don't want to talk too much about it, but there are other supernatural entities, if you like.
Right.
It's really interesting. And that certainly comes out in the Genesis Apocryphon.
Yep, Genesis Apocryphon, and a lot of these stories. Again, when you were just talking about the passage from Genesis 6, it came to pass when men began to multiply and the daughters were born and so forth. If you open there, you see very clearly that's J. It's as soon as that strange story begins, you're in J, and
right.
J. We're going to learn a lot about these different sources, at least how they're identified. And we're going to begin to pick things up. I mean, you have talking serpents, you have things of that nature, and we're gonna get to where you go, well, that's Jay. I mean, it's like one of those things. It's like a calling card.
It's a calling card, and in this Torah portion that we're dealing with now in Noach, we have descendants of Adam with incredible lifespans, and it goes hand in hand with this sort of mythical period of time where the B'nai Elohim dwelt among us and all this sort of stuff. And the Book of Enoch and the Genesis Apocryphon is just a great read that gives you sort of a window into that that period of time, or what they want us to believe was that period of time.
Yep.
On that, now, of course, it goes on from there into, it talks about, or just before that, the Tower of Babel, this and that. I don't know that we've got time to get into all of that right now, because what I'd love to do before we go is address some questions and comments, Ross.
Okay. All right.
Unless there was anything else
and these
you
are
wanted to
from these are from our viewers and
from Bereshit.
All right.
That's right. So we did ask, and dear viewers, we would love for you to leave comments on this show. Anything to do with this particular show, last show, Lech Lecha, if you want to ask a question about that we can incorporate into the program, we're absolutely willing to do it. Even more so if you are a member or a contributor to the HOREB Institute or Truth to You. We'll certainly prioritize. So the first one comes from, how do I pronounce this? Hernish.
Okay.
Commented on Bereshit, Ross, saying, sadly, this whole line of thinking is completely off the rails, Ross.
Okay.
Modern scholarship, she says, has taken the alphabet soup path that has given us more than two genders. We have exchanged life and the spirit for eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. She's not a fan, but I love this comment, Ross, because she's actually referring to two passages within the Bereshit Torah portion.
Okay.
One is Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, which says, male and female, he created them, right?
Yep.
Which is attributed to the priestly source. And the second is eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which, as she would have learned last week, is a passage attributed to the J source. So I think what she means to say is she means to liken source criticism to today's leftist ideologies, I guess. You and I are certainly not leftists, and we probably would not promote leftist ideologies on this program. And while we might be politically conservative, I think when it comes to biblical research, Ross, I think we're better described as originalists. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think in our biblical pursuits, for sure, our goal is to get back at, as the name originalist would imply, what is the earliest source? What's the first source of these thoughts, these stories, these narratives? And so in that sense, absolutely, that's what we're looking for. But we're certainly paying close attention to the work of scholars. It doesn't mean that we have to accept everything, because scholarship doesn't agree on all these. In fact, even though we're talking about the documentary hypothesis in these programs, that is not universally accepted. It finally came into the form that we now know it through Wellhausen in the 19th century, but there are plenty of other theories. But now, just to that point, Jono, even though we're originalists and we're not literalist in the sense that a lot of fundamentalists are, we're not fundamentalists, I think that a lot of people who are fundamentalist might look at us and think, those liberal scholars, they don't believe anything. And you and I are going to have to do a show just on that whenever our schedule opens up because of that. Wouldn't you agree?
I think we have done a show on that. And I think we entitled it. I think we have. I think we entitled it "Why We Are No Longer Fundamentalists." I think
that would be a good title for it. If we didn't do one, that's what we need to do. Yeah,
Seth, if we did a show like that, just find it and put it under here. But there's that one can be for Hernish.
Hey, can we jump? Can I jump in with one I just found, and we'll just go through a few of these? I know. All right, so I found one from Mary Truthseeker. Mary Truthseeker. I'm gonna go ahead and say that Mary is searching for the truth. I like that name.
It's good.
Mary says, "I am rather shocked and disappointed that you would even mess around with this thing, much less give it the biblical name Ezra, as if it could compare."
Do you know? There's a lot of people named Ezra.
So it's not just our It's not just our ChatGPT-driven textpert named Ezra. But I get the point.
No.
Look, a lot of people are a little apprehensive about this whole AI thing. And there's some concern. And some of the concern, I think, is it's unknown. As Mary Truthseeker says, she's shocked and disappointed that you would even mess around with this thing. So first of all, Mary, it wasn't my idea to do it. It was Jono's idea in the first place.
It's my idea.
Yeah.
It's my idea. And look, Mary, if you find something that Ezra says that you disagree with, by all means, highlight that and let us know what that is, and we'll take a close look at it.
Now, can I highlight something that he messed up on tonight?
Go on.
Okay, just as a perfect example, if I'm not mistaken, when Ezra was giving his summary or his sort of a overall view of this Parsha, he says that the ark rested, according to the Bible, on Mount Ararat.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're strict, according to the text, that's not what it says. The texts say that it rested on the mountains of Ararat, as in the region of Ararat. So
a mountain range within the region, yeah.
So we encourage people, we're having a little bit of fun, but we do encourage people to challenge, Ross, Jono, Ezra, because that's what we have to do. We have to be critical thinkers. And what I really want people to get out of this is, as we begin to really pursue understanding the Bible in its original setting, its original language and context, we can't be too careful. I mean, we have to really dig deeply and try to figure out what's going on here. And whether it's one of us or our textpert friend, mistakes can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. This one's for you, Ross. This comes from TP Osborne 77. He writes, "Hello, Ross." He says, "I suggest that when the scribe copied the Moses scroll, it was done at a time to avoid speaking or even writing the name," and he's got the Tetragrammaton, right? Jehovah. Right. I'm going to refer to that. "They had no vowel points to vowel it to say either Adonai or Elohim, as did the later Masoretic scribes. So the method they chose was to substitute the name Elohim for Jehovah. But it originally read, in his opinion, I am Jehovah Eloheka, since the name Jehovah was already revealed to Moses at the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3, when the 10 words were, whereas the 10 words were given in Exodus chapter 20. What do you think? What do you think, Ross?"
First of all, I know T.P. Osborne. Good day, Tracy. I happen to know him from a long time back. And I will say, this is actually a loaded question. Whenever the scroll first showed up on the scene, Moses Shapira had similar thoughts in terms of, he tried to figure out, why would the manuscript use Elohim and not Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh? And he has, in fact, I posted on my academia page one of these sheets that I found in the archive. Others have seen it as well, other Shapira researchers, but it shows pros and cons where Shapira is literally writing down on paper why this could be authentic, why it could be a forgery. He's really struggling with this. And one of the things he says is, could it be that someone did not know the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh? And he said, and if this is the case, why is the first verse and the last verse, why does it use the name and the rest of the document is apparently an Elohist document? Right. So Tracy asked an interesting question. Could it be that this manuscript originally contained the name, and then later someone, by the time sensitivities developed around pronouncing the name, or a religiosity developed around it that said you no longer pronounce the name of God, such as we clearly have by the Second Temple period, could it have then been edited to reflect a later theological stand? I see it just the opposite. Now, this is a chicken or the egg conversation in some way, but there's a big debate. Which one came first? Jono and I talked about in the last on Bereshit, we talked about certain Psalms, Psalm 14, Psalm 53. You have some which use Elohim, and the identical psalm in 53, it's like one uses Elohim, one uses Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. I believe, and I think that we just mentioned this recording that that you I think, did we post the thing from Edan where he was in an interview? He
Yes.
actually
Mm.
said he used to believe that as well, that it was first, it was later changed to Elohim, but he says now he believes that Elohim is the earliest form. So all of that to say, I think that Elohim is the first. Now, the last part of this, I'll touch this, Jono, and I'll throw it to you, but it originally, says Tracy, read, I am Yehovah Eloheka, your Elohim, since the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was already revealed to Moses at the burning bush when the 10 words were given in Exodus chapter 20. So he's saying that he would expect it, if you have a copy of the 10 words, to say Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh and not Elohim as we see in the Moses scroll. What I believe, this is just my view, I believe, and I think this is supported by historical critical scholarship, that the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh comes in later, and it is then inserted into the text, and we see a lot of examples of that direction. Jono.
I entirely agree with what you've just said, and I think a great example that you just highlighted was the one that Edan highlighted, and that is that it says Elohim Echad at the end of the Shema, Elohim Echad, which makes much more sense than Jehovah Echad. As Edan says, well, what is he supposed to be? Is he supposed to be two? Why would you say that?
Right.
But Elohim as a plural makes more sense to say that he is one, he is united. So I'm inclined to agree. But yeah, that's a question worth bringing up, TP, so thanks for that. Next, and lastly, I think, is, and I don't know how to pronounce this, Andres Lowell 8256. Sorry, Guy, if I've mispronounced your name there, but that's the best I can do with it.
Okay.
He asks, or she asks, the LDS, Latter-day Saints, Ross, teachings talk about, and he's paraphrasing here, a pre-creational council of which Elohim, God, was the head, and he told Jehovah, Jesus, he has in brackets, to create everything. They also have a different idea of the creation days. My question is, could it be that Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormons, was able to get his hands on documents that they did not know of in those days? Right.
What do you think?
Ask Ezra. We could ask Ezra. I'm not the expert on the Latter-day Saints. Perhaps we can ask Ezra to give us a summary of the revelation narrative of the Latter-day Saints. But before we do that, Ross,
Okay.
I'm going to say that the private revelation narrative of Joseph Smith, to me, is in no way credible. I honestly, I'm just going to be really blunt. I don't know how people read that and find any sort of credibility in that story. But I'll let people do their own research there. Having said that, the idea of a divine council is not new when it comes to explaining, let us make man in our image, right? We have commentators that will refer to Isaiah chapter 6 or 1 Kings chapter 22, whereas in Isaiah chapter 6, you've got the seraphim and you've got various entities around the throne of God in 1 Kings 22. I think that's the story of the prophet Micaiah. It's a really cool story, right?
Yeah.
And he says, I saw God amongst the heavenly hosts and this and that. And so the explanation is, well, you see, this is the us is the what do they call the divine council?
Right.
I think is what they refer to. The other part of it, and I didn't know that the Latter-day Saints did this with the text, but I'm sure this is where they get it from, is El Elyon in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 7 to 9. And this is quite a controversial text, Ross. It says, and maybe you can open it in your Torah tablet. This is Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 7 to 9.
Well, we don't have Deuteronomy yet.
We don't have Deuteronomy yet.
Well, I mean,
All right,
we have it, but I don't have it printed, and it's not in front of me. So, but let me do this. I can read the text, Deuteronomy in ASV, which that
Go
would
ahead.
be, yeah. So give me
Let's
the
do that.
verse one more time, and I will open that up.
32 verses 7 to 9.
Okay. Deuteronomy 32, verses 7 to 9. Here we go, Jono. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, and he will show thee, thine elders, and they will tell thee. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the children of men, he set the bounds of the peoples according to the number of the children of Israel. For Jehovah's portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance.
Right. So the reason why this is controversial, and when you say the Most High, that is El Elyon, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about that in our next Torah portion, Lech Lecha. But it seems that El Elyon appears as the head of a pantheon of gods in this verse, under whom Jehovah is allotted the people of Jacob. Verse 8b, you put emphasis on.
I did.
Right? You did, and I think perhaps you know this, that in the Septuagint and in 4Q37, rather than reading what you just read to the people of Israel, it reads according to the sons of El.
Yeah.
In the Dead Sea Scrolls, I guess it must be B'nai Elohim or B'nai El. Whereas I think in the Greek it says something like Anglos Theos or something. I don't know the Greek, but
let me just say, just to jump in, the reading in these other texts is B'nai El. You're exactly right. Yeah,
it's
I'm
B'nai
looking
El.
at it. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. So, and I think the ESV and the NRSV concur with that reading. But what it does convey is El Elyon as the head of the pantheon of the gods, and Jehovah beneath, and that there are allotted, certain regions, if you like, to the sons of El. So quite controversial, and this may be where the Latter-day Saints get this idea from.
All right. Now, did you want to go ahead and let Ezra pipe in on that and give us a brief summary of that view according to the LDS?
Yeah, go ahead.
The Latter-day Saints' Revelations narrative centers on God restoring the full gospel through 19th century prophet Joseph Smith. Smith's first vision of God and Jesus, followed by the translation of the Book of Mormon and numerous revelations in the Doctrine and Covenants, reestablished what believers see as the true church with restored priesthood authority. This ongoing revelation guides the LDS Church through its prophets, anticipating the gathering of Israel, the building of Zion, and preparation for Christ's second coming.
It's incredibly replacement theology based, and it involves, and what Ezra hasn't mentioned there is that it involves gold tablets that he found, and were written in a very ancient Hebrew that he himself was able to. God gave him the ability to translate. Something to do with putting them in a hat and reading them from a hat. It's all very, very weird. Gold tablets that he was not able to produce, didn't need them anymore. Who needs gold? And the whole thing, I think anyone who reads it objectively would come away and say, yeah, well, but it's not. My point is that it's not entirely without basis in the Tanakh. The question that is highlighted by Andreslo. I'm not how to pronounce. I don't know how to pronounce the name, dude. So, but thank you for the question. I hope that helps.
Look, we had one other question that I just saw, and it's from Tekora 7419. Tekora writes, "Can you list the books that you'll be using for this series?" Great question,
Good.
Takora. So, what I will tell you is that in the description of every video, we have that list. So, if you simply, if you're listening to Noah right now, you simply look in the description of the video, or if you're listening to Bereshit or Lech Lecha or whichever of the series, you just look down and you will there find a list of recommended reading. Of course, we'll have, Jono just held up the Jewish Study Bible. The translation with that is JPS. We have the Genesis Torah tablet.
Tablets.
And we have some Hebrew works as well, some Dead Sea Scrolls. And we will also, depending on what material we cover, we'll post that as well. So if we discuss certain books or manuscripts or articles, like this Torah.com article, we'll put those in the description as well. So great question, Takora. Anything else,
and
Jono?
Not to forget, of course, the Moses Scroll as well, we're going to be referring to from time to time. No, that is all. I think that we have run out of time, Ross, and next week we're going to be doing Lech Lecha.
I can't wait.
We're going to be touching on some of the topics we've already touched on, and it is fascinating. I tell you, there's a whole lot of stuff that I found in Lech Lecha that I honestly didn't expect to be so fascinating and interesting. We're going to be talking about that, and we look forward to everybody joining us then. Any parting thoughts?
Just remind people again. Let's remind them. Leave your comments in the discussion below. Of course, when this airs on Thursday nights, you can enter it into the chat right there, the live chat. We're going to do a premiere each week of the Torah portion, and those who help support this particular series, Torah Pearls Season 3. Those questions get prioritized, so please do leave us super chats during the premiere.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Ezra. Take us out, Ezra, from the show.
That wraps up our second episode. Thanks for diving into Parashat Noach with us. There's so much richness in these ancient stories and their echoes around the world. Until next time, keep studying, keep questioning, and may your curiosity be as boundless as Noah's Ark. Shalom, and see you in the next episode.